Life in the suburbs had its rhythm, a soothing melody of predictable comfort. Claire and I were the couple everyone envied, or at least that's what it seemed like. We had the big house with the white picket fence, a golden retriever named Max who greeted everyone like a long-lost friend, and 2 kids who looked like they'd been handpicked for a holiday card. It was the American dream, neatly packaged in a 4-bedroom colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn. At least that's what it looked like on the surface. Inside, we were the Joneses people tried to keep up with. We hosted barbecues every summer, complete with Claire's famous potato salad and my carefully grilled steaks. Our Halloween decorations were the talk of the block. Neighbors would stop and marvel at our synchronized light displays during Christmas. On social media we were picture perfect, #family-goals, #forever-love, #blessed. But the truth is, perfection is just a mask, a polished facade hiding the cracks underneath. For years I thought Claire and I were a team, partners who could weather anything life threw at us. We weren't just married, we were best friends, the kind of couple who shared inside jokes and could communicate with a glance. Or so I thought. The reality hit me like a freight train one late evening when I discovered she was having an affair with Jake, our neighbor and close family friend. It started as a feeling. You know the one, that gut instinct that something's off. Claire had been acting different. At first I chalked it up to stress. The kids were older now and had busier schedules. Work had been demanding for her. Or maybe it was just one of those phases people go through. But then the little things began to pile up, and the picture I had in my head of our happy marriage started to blur. She laughed harder at Jake's jokes during our backyard barbecues. Not just polite chuckles but real, belly-aching laughter, the kind I hadn't heard from her in a while. They always seemed to find their way into conversations that excluded the rest of us. And then there were her late nights, book club meetings, she said. At first I believed her. Claire didn't give me a reason not to. But the more she slipped into those nights, the more I realized something was off. Here's the kicker. Claire doesn't even like reading. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was being paranoid. After all, wasn't I the one who always said trust is the foundation of a good marriage? But trust is a funny thing. It takes years to build and seconds to shatter. And then the cameras. Well, the irony. About 6 months ago, a wave of petty thefts had swept through our neighborhood. A couple of stolen packages, a missing bike, and suddenly everyone was on edge. Being the tech guy I am, I installed a surveillance system around our house. Not just the cheap, off-the-shelf kind either. I went all out. Motion sensors, night vision, audio recording. It was overkill, but I enjoyed tinkering with it. The cameras weren't meant for spying, but one night as I sat in my home office staring at the monitors, curiosity got the better of me. The cameras captured everything: comings and goings, late-night raccoon invasions, even the occasional stray cat prowling the yard. But it wasn't a raccoon or a cat that I saw on the screen that night. It was Claire. And Jake. The footage was grainy, black and white, but there was no mistaking what I was seeing. Claire, sitting on the couch in our living room, her posture relaxed, her face lit up in a way that had become unfamiliar. Jake leaned in closer, his hand brushing hers. I held my breath, hoping, praying, that she'd pull away, laugh it off, or slap him. But she didn't. She kissed him back. Not a hesitant, uncertain kiss. No, this was deep, passionate, the kind of kiss you give someone when you've forgotten the world exists. They weren't just kissing, they were consumed by each other. The timestamp on the footage told me it was during one of her so-called book club nights. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the screen, my fists clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. I wanted to rewind the footage, watch it again, and convince myself I'd seen it wrong. But there was no mistaking it. The evidence was right there in front of me, unforgiving and unchangeable. That night I didn't confront her. How could I? She lay beside me in bed, the faint scent of lavender from her shampoo filling the air. Her breathing was steady, her face serene, as if she hadn't just ripped my world apart. I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. How long had this been going on? Was it just Jake, or were there others? And the question that haunted me most, why? The next morning, Claire moved through the house as if nothing had happened. She smiled at the kids over breakfast, packed their lunches, and kissed them on the foreheads before sending them off to school. I watched her, searching for a crack in her facade, a hint of guilt. But there was nothing. She was a better actor than I ever gave her credit for. That day, I decided I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw things or demand answers. That would be too easy, too predictable. No, I needed time to think, to plan. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling: betrayal, humiliation, devastation. And I wanted her to feel it in a way she'd never forget. The idea came to me slowly, a seed of anger that sprouted into something darker. Revenge wasn't just about evening the score, it was about reclaiming my dignity. And what better stage for my revenge than the one we'd built together? Our meticulously curated social media accounts. Claire loved our Instagram. It was her playground, her masterpiece. Every picture was perfectly edited, every caption carefully crafted. Together, we had built an audience of friends, family, and even a few strangers who envied our perfect life. Now I was going to show them the truth. That weekend I started pulling it all together. Old family videos, snapshots of happier times, those cheesy selfies we took at the beach. All of it was fair game. I spent hours combing through footage, finding the moments that told the story of US, or at least the story we wanted people to believe. And then, buried within the montage, I added the surveillance footage. The kiss. The betrayal. Layer by layer the video took shape. It was a symphony of love, trust, and heartbreak. For the caption I wrote something that would resonate, something that would hit like a punch to the gut. Sometimes, love blinds us to the truth. But the truth always finds its way to the surface. I scheduled the post for Sunday evening, right when our followers would be scrolling their feeds, looking for a glimpse into our perfect life. As the clock ticked down to 7 p.m., my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my story, my voice. When the time came, I hovered over the published button for a moment, then pressed it. And just like that, the mask of perfection shattered. When I hit publish, I didn't feel satisfaction, at least not at first. My hand hovered over the mouse as if I could undo what I'd just done. But there's no rewind button in real life, and the damage was already set in motion. It took less than 2 minutes for the notifications to start rolling in. Likes, comments, private messages. Our curated circle of admirers, family, and friends had been drawn into the trap. It wasn't just a social media post anymore, it was a live grenade tossed into the middle of our perfect lives. Upstairs, Claire was folding laundry, oblivious to the chaos unfolding just a swipe away. The first person to comment was Claire's sister, Erica. Erica, wow, this is so beautiful. You two are such an inspiration. She had no idea. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then came the other comments. The ones from people who weren't just scrolling and double tapping, but actually watching the video. Greg, college buddy, is anyone else seeing what I'm seeing? Jenna, soccer mom from next door, wait, is that Claire and Jake? Then the private messages started flooding in, mostly from confused friends. Tom, golf buddy dude? What the hell is this? Maggie, Claire's coworker, please tell me this is some kind of mistake. Within an hour, it had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. People were sharing the post, tagging their friends, and speculating in group chats. I could feel the web tightening around Claire. Still, she remained blissfully unaware, humming to herself as she moved from room to room. At dinner, I kept things as normal as possible. The kids chattered about their day, Max sat by the table hoping for scraps, and Claire smiled like the doting wife she pretended to be. I watched her, studying every detail. How many times had I seen this same scene, thinking it was real? Something on your mind, hon? She asked, her voice sweet as honey. Not really, I said, forcing a smile. Just thinking about how lucky we are. She beamed at me, completely missing the sarcasm. The moment felt surreal. I wondered how long it would take for her phone to blow up. How long until Erica or one of her friends clued her in. It wasn't long. By the time we finished eating, her phone started vibrating on the counter. At first she ignored it. Then another notification and another. Her brow furrowed as she walked over to check. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to sip my coffee, while her world began to unravel. Why is everyone tagging me in? She muttered, her voice trailing off. She stared at the screen, her face draining of color. What the? Her eyes darted to me, wide and frantic. What did you do? I shrugged, keeping my expression as neutral as possible. I don't know what you're talking about. You posted this, she hissed, her voice trembling. This video, it's the truth? I finished for her. Claire's reaction was immediate and visceral. She slammed her phone down on the table and stood there, shaking. How could you do this? You've humiliated me, humiliated us. Humiliated us? I said, my voice rising. You did that the moment you decided to cheat, Claire. I just gave everyone else a front row seat. Her eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Not yet. This isn't fair, she yelled. You had no right to air our private life like this. Private? I laughed bitterly. You didn't seem to care about privacy when you were locking lips with Jake on my couch. Or did you forget the cameras I installed? The same ones you praised me for setting up to keep our family safe? Her face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation. You don't understand? Oh, I understand perfectly, I snapped, cutting her off. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And now the world knows who you really are. She stormed out of the room, her phone clutched in her hand. I could hear her upstairs, pacing, probably trying to do damage control. The notifications hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd increased. Every few seconds, another comment or tag pinged on her phone, mocking the picture-perfect life she'd spent years cultivating. Meanwhile, I cleaned up dinner. The kids didn't notice anything unusual, they were too busy with their homework. But Max stayed close to me, sensing the tension. By the time I finished, Claire was back downstairs, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. She had her phone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. What do you want? She asked, her voice hoarse. Finally, I said, setting the dish towel aside. Now we're getting somewhere. She sat down at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. I'm serious, what do you want from me? An apology? A divorce? Tell me so I can fix this. Fix this? I leaned forward, my voice dropping. You can't fix this, Claire. This isn't some broken chair you can glue back together. This is our marriage, our life, and you smashed it to pieces. All I did was make sure you couldn't sweep the mess under the rug. Her lips quivered, but she didn't say anything. Why? I asked after a long silence. Why him? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Was it worth it? I pressed, my voice rising again. Sneaking around, lying to me, risking everything we've built? Was it worth it for him? Her tears spilled over, but I didn't stop. Do you even love him? I demanded. I don't know, she cried, burying her face in her hands. Her answer hit harder than I expected. She didn't even know. All of this, our shattered family, her tarnished reputation, over something she couldn't even define. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally I stood up, grabbing my keys from the counter. Where are you going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Out, I said simply. I need some air. As I walked to the car, the night was eerily quiet. The weight of what I'd done started to sink in. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about truth, consequences, and the fact that nothing would ever be the same again. The post had lit a fire that couldn't be extinguished, and we were both about to burn. Driving through the quiet, tree-lined streets of our neighborhood, I rolled the windows down, letting the crisp night air cool the heat in my chest. The adrenaline from watching Claire break down was ebbing, replaced by a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. I dealt the blow, but the fallout was just beginning, and the weight of what came next pressed heavy on my shoulders. I parked at the Overlook just outside town, the place I used to come to clear my head back when life felt simpler. Staring out at the distant city lights, I replayed the past 24 hours. Was I a monster for airing our dirty laundry so publicly? Maybe. But then I thought about the betrayal, the lies, and the months I'd spent wondering why my marriage felt like it was slipping away. Jake. God of all people. A friend. A neighbor. Someone I grilled burgers with and shared beers over football games. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening. How long had they been laughing behind my back? The ping of my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Messages had been pouring in nonstop since the post went live, but one name stood out. Jake. Jake, you had no right to do this. Jake, we need to talk. Now. Jake, you're ruining lives over a mistake. I scoffed, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. A mistake? He didn't get to call this a mistake. Mistakes were forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. This was a calculated betrayal, and now he wanted to play the victim? As if on cue, my phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring out, staring at the phone like it was something toxic. When it stopped, a voicemail notification popped up. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the message. Man, what the hell are you doing? This is between us, me and you, not the whole damn town. You've got kids, for God's sake. Do you really want them to grow up seeing this crap? Call me back. We need to fix this before it gets worse. I laughed bitterly as I hit delete. Fix this. The time for fixing things was long gone. When I finally returned home, the house was dark except for a faint glow from the living room. Claire was still awake, curled up on the couch with a blanket draped over her. She looked up as I stepped inside, her eyes bloodshot and puffy. You're back, she said, her voice hoarse. I ignored her, walking past to the kitchen. The sight of her like this didn't stir the sympathy she was probably hoping for. I poured myself a glass of water, leaning against the counter as she followed me. We need to talk, she said quietly. About what? I replied, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. About how you destroyed our marriage. About how you betrayed me and the kids. Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry this time. I made a mistake. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare call it a mistake. A mistake is spilling coffee on the rug. What you did was deliberate. She took a deep breath, gripping the back of a chair as if to steady herself. You don't understand? No, Claire, you don't understand, I said, my voice rising. Do you know what it's like to sit there, loving someone, trusting them, only to find out they've been lying to your face? To know that while you're working, taking care of the kids, keeping this family afloat, they're sneaking around with someone you thought was a friend? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. That's what I thought, I said, pushing past her. I went upstairs, leaving her standing there, and checked on the kids. Both were fast asleep, their small faces peaceful and unaware of the storm brewing around them. I sat on the edge of my son's bed for a while, the weight of everything settling in. They didn't deserve this. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Claire arguing on the phone. As I came downstairs, I realized it wasn't just her voice, it was Erica, her sister, yelling on the other end. I don't care how you spin it, Claire. Everyone's seen the video. Do you know how humiliating this is for me? For Mom and Dad? They've been fielding calls all morning. Claire glanced up as I entered the kitchen, her face a mix of shame and frustration. Erica, I can't talk right now. Oh, I think you can. Erica shot back. Because until you explain this mess, I'm not. Claire ended the call abruptly, tossing her phone onto the counter. Well, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Looks like your PR campaign isn't going so well. Stop, she said, her voice trembling. Just stop. This isn't funny. It's not supposed to be, I replied coldly. By the afternoon, the fallout had spread beyond our immediate circle. A neighbor stopped by under the guise of returning a dish but couldn't resist slipping in a comment. We're all just so shocked, she said, her eyes darting between Claire and me. If there's anything we can do, let us know. Claire forced a polite smile, but as soon as the door closed, she turned to me. Are you enjoying this? She spat. Turning me into a public spectacle? You did that yourself, I said evenly. The messages from Jake didn't stop. By the second day, they'd shifted from pleading to angry. Jake, you're destroying everything over a personal issue. Jake, you don't even know the whole story. Jake, if you don't take that post down, I swear to God. I wasn't intimidated. If anything, his threats fueled me. He thought he could manipulate me like he'd manipulated Claire, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. I saved every message, every voicemail. If he wanted a fight, I'd make sure I was armed. By the third day, the cracks in Claire's resolve began to show. She was quieter, more withdrawn, but her anger simmered beneath the surface. Every conversation between us was clipped, filled with unspoken tension. I didn't care. Let her stew in it. Let her feel what it's like to have the world judge you. But even as I reveled in her discomfort, a nagging voice in the back of my mind kept asking, what now? Was this the end of our marriage, or was there still something worth salvaging? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. The facade of perfection was gone, and there was no going back. By the end of the week, the social media post had become a wildfire, spreading far beyond our neighborhood. Friends of friends were sharing it, tagging mutuals, dissecting every second of the video. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, asking questions, offering their opinions. Even Claire's co-workers had started whispering about it. She came home on Thursday looking like she'd been hit by a bus, her face pale, her eyes sunken. She dropped her bag on the counter and turned to me, her voice trembling. They sent me home early, she said. Oh? I replied, barely looking up from my laptop. Everyone at work knows, she continued, her words coming out in a rush. They wouldn't stop staring. Some of them were whispering. I couldn't even get through lunch without. That's what happens when you destroy your family on camera, I said flatly, clicking through emails. Her hands clenched into fists. Do you even care? Do you realize what you've done to me? What I've done to you? I said, my voice rising. No, Claire. This is what you did to yourself. Don't sit here and act like the victim. You didn't care about how this would affect me or the kids when you were sneaking around with Jake, did you? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might scream. Instead, she turned on her heel and disappeared upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The kids were starting to pick up on the tension. My daughter, Olivia, had asked me earlier in the week why Mommy was so sad all the time. Did Max do something bad again? She asked, her small voice full of concern. I knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, sweetie. Max didn't do anything. Sometimes grown-ups just have Problems they need to figure out? Are you and Mommy fighting? She asked, her big brown eyes searching mine. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. A little, I admitted. But it's not your fault. Mommy and Daddy love you very much, okay? She nodded, but the furrow in her little brow told me she wasn't convinced. By Friday, the tension between Claire and me had reached its boiling point. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was clipped and bitter. The only time we interacted for more than a few minutes was when Jake showed up at our doorstep. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting in the living room when I saw his truck pull into the driveway. My blood ran cold. He had the audacity to show up here? I didn't wait for him to knock. I was out the door and halfway down the driveway before he even stepped out of the truck. What the hell are you doing here? I barked, my fists clenched at my sides. Jake raised his hands as if to placate me. I'm not here to fight, he said. I just want to talk. Talk? I laughed bitterly. You mean like you talked to my wife behind my back? Get the hell off my property. Listen, man. No, you listen, I snapped, cutting him off. You had the nerve to come into my home, eat my food, play with my kids, and then betray me like this? And now you want to talk? Get out of here before I call the cops. Claire appeared at the door, her face pale. What's going on? Jake turned to her, his expression softening. Claire, Don't, I warned, stepping between them. You don't get to talk to her. Not here. Not ever. Jake hesitated, his jaw tightening. You're making this worse than it needs to be, he muttered. Oh, trust me, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I'm just getting started. He stood there for a moment as if debating whether to push his luck. But eventually he turned and got back into his truck, driving off without another word. That night Claire and I had our worst fight yet. You had no right to do that, she shouted, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. No right? I shot back. This is my house, Claire. Jake has no business being here. He just wanted to talk. Yeah, well, he can talk to someone else. As far as I'm concerned, he doesn't exist anymore. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might cry again. But then her anger flared back to life. You've turned our lives into a circus, she said, her voice shaking. Do you even realize what you've done to the kids? To me? To you? I snapped, slamming my hand on the counter. You're worried about what I've done to you? You're the one who cheated Claire. You're the one who dragged Jake into this family like some kind of parasite. Don't you dare put this on me. She flinched but didn't back down. I made a mistake, okay? I was lonely and Jake? Don't, I warned, my voice cold as ice. Don't you dare try to justify this. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. What do you want from me? She finally whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't know what I wanted. The next morning, I found Claire sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her expression hollow. What's this? I asked, nodding toward the papers. Options, she said quietly. Therapy. Mediation. Even divorce lawyers if that's what you want. I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. And what do you want? I finally asked. I want to fix this, she said, her voice breaking. But I can't do it alone. For the first time in days, her tears felt real. The storm hadn't passed, but this was the first crack of light on the horizon. Whether we'd make it out together or not remained to be seen. The house was quieter than it had been in days. Too quiet. Claire sat at the dining table, staring at the stack of papers, brochures for therapists, printouts for mediation services, and the contact information for a divorce lawyer scribbled on a post-it. Her hands trembled as she shuffled through them, as if holding the papers themselves might steady her. I stood in the doorway watching her. For all my anger, seeing her like this, a shadow of the woman I once loved, stirred something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer than the rage I'd been carrying. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Fighting takes energy and I was running on empty. You want coffee? I asked, my voice cutting through the stillness. She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there. What? Coffee? I repeated, holding up my mug. Do you want some? She shook her head. No thanks. I poured my own, filling the silence with the sound of liquid against ceramic. When I turned back, she was still staring at the papers, her fingers tracing the edge of one like it might cut her. Did you think this would fix everything? I asked, nodding toward the table. I don't know, she said softly. I don't know what else to do. That afternoon I took the kids out to the park. They needed normalcy, something that didn't involve hushed arguments or tearful silences. Olivia and Max raced ahead, her giggles mingling with the sound of the wind, while my son Ethan stayed closer to me, clutching his baseball glove. "Are you and Mom gonna be okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice so small I almost didn't hear it. I stopped mid-step, my chest tightening. "What makes you ask that?" He shrugged, looking down at his sneakers. "You've been fighting a lot. And she cries a lot too. I heard her last night." I knelt down so I could meet his eyes. "Things are complicated right now, bud. But no matter what happens, your mom and I both love you and Olivia. That'll never change." "Promise?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I promise," I said, ruffling his hair. But even as the words left my mouth, a knot of uncertainty twisted in my gut. When we got home, Claire was sitting in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. She looked up as we walked in, her expression guarded. "How was the park?" she asked. "Fine," I said shortly, her voice grating on my nerves despite my efforts to stay calm. She turned her attention back to the screen, her fingers tapping nervously at the keys. I took the kids upstairs, settling them into their rooms before heading back down. Claire was still in the same spot, staring blankly at the laptop. "Do you want to tell me what this is about?" I asked, nodding toward the screen. "It's an email," she said. "From Jake," she admitted, her voice barely audible. The anger I'd been trying to suppress came roaring back. "Why the hell are you still talking to him?" "I'm not," she insisted, her eyes wide. "He emailed me. I haven't responded. I swear." I crossed the room in 3 quick strides, leaning over to read the email. It was a mess of apologies, excuses, and desperate attempts to justify what he'd done. "Jake, Claire, I never meant for things to get this far. I was just lonely and I thought you felt the same. Please, can we talk? Just one more time? I need closure." I slammed the laptop shut, the force rattling the coffee table. "Closure?" I spat. "He wants closure?" "It doesn't matter," Claire said, her voice shaking. "I'm not going to respond." "Damn right you're not," I said, my fists clenching. "You're going to block him. Right now." She hesitated for a moment before nodding. Opening the laptop, she navigated to her email and blocked him. The little action felt like a drop in the ocean, but it was something. That night, after the kids were asleep, Claire and I sat in the kitchen, the tension between us thick and heavy. "I blocked him," she said after a long silence, as if that would ease the strain. "Good," I replied, not looking up from my drink. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at the glass in my hand, the amber liquid catching the light. "That depends on you," I said finally. "On me? You say you want to fix this, but do you really mean it? Or are you just scared of what happens if you don't?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. "I want to fix it," she said. "I just don't know how." The next day, I called one of the therapists from her stack of papers and scheduled a session. It wasn't for her, it was for me. I needed someone to help me sort through the mess in my head, the anger and betrayal that refused to let me think straight. Sitting in the therapist's office later that week, I spilled everything: the affair, the social media post, the fallout. "Do you regret what you did?" the therapist asked, her pen poised above her notepad. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "No," I said honestly. "I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret showing people who she really is." "And do you think that's going to help you heal?" she pressed. I didn't have an answer for that. By the time I got home, the kids were asleep and Claire was sitting in the living room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "How was it?" she asked hesitantly. "Fine," I said, brushing past her. "Andrew," she called after me, her voice trembling. "I'm trying." "So am I," I said over my shoulder, disappearing up the stairs. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Claire crying in the kitchen. She wasn't loud, but it was enough to wake me. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening, torn between anger and pity. For the first time, I wondered if there was anything left to save. Claire's muffled sobs carried through the quiet house, each one sharper than the last. I lingered at the top of the stairs, debating whether to go down or let her wallow in the mess she'd created. I should have felt triumphant, she was finally facing the consequences. But instead I just felt tired. Dragging myself downstairs, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. The papers were still scattered in front of her, now crumpled and smeared with tears. "Could you keep it down?" I said, leaning against the doorway. "The kids are still asleep." She looked up, her eyes rimmed with red. "Andrew, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" I shot back, crossing my arms. "Living with the fallout of your own decisions?" Her shoulders sagged under the weight of my words, and for a moment, I thought she might crumple to the floor. I know I messed up, she said, her voice shaking. I know I hurt you and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I can't fix this if you won't let me. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. Fix what, Claire? Do you even know what you're trying to fix? This isn't just some broken chair you can glue back together. You shattered everything. You can't undo that. She didn't say anything, just sat there, staring at me like I held the key to her redemption. But I wasn't ready to hand her anything, not yet. I called a therapist, I said finally. For me? Her head shot up, hope flickering in her eyes. That's good, she said softly. Don't read too much into it, I warned. I'm doing this for myself, not for you. I can't make any decisions about us until I get my own head straight. She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. I understand. Over the next week, things between us settled into an uneasy truce. We spoke only when necessary, logistics about the kids, scheduling conflicts, grocery lists. The rest of the time we stayed out of each other's way. The kids, though, were a different story. They could sense the shift in the house, even if they didn't understand it. Olivia had taken to watching us with wide, worried eyes, while Ethan had become quieter than usual, retreating into his video games. One night, I found Olivia sitting at the dining table, coloring a picture of our family. She'd drawn me, Claire herself, and Ethan standing in front of the house, all of us holding hands. Above us, in big, colorful letters, she'd written, "My happy family." My chest tightened as I sat down beside her. That's a beautiful picture, sweetheart, I said, ruffling her hair. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with innocent hope. Is it going to be okay, Daddy? I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. I don't know, Liv, I admitted. But I promise we're trying. Claire and I went to therapy together for the first time the following week. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me wanted to skip the whole thing and call it quits. But another part of me, the part that remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, wanted to see if there was anything left to salvage. The session started with awkward introductions and tense silence. The therapist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, wasted no time cutting through the tension. So, she said, glancing between us. Why are you here? I laughed bitterly. That's a loaded question. Take your time, she said gently. Claire spoke first, her voice trembling. I'm here because I made a terrible mistake. I hurt my husband, my kids, my family, everyone I care about. And I want to make things right. Do you really? I asked, turning to her. Because it seems like you only started caring when people found out. She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. That's not fair, Andrew. I've been trying. Trying? I snapped. You weren't trying when you were sneaking around with Jake. You weren't trying when you lied to my face over and over again. The therapist raised a hand, cutting me off. Andrew, I understand your anger, but let's try to focus on what you need to move forward. What I need. I said, laughing bitterly. I need to know why. Why him? Why now? Why risk everything we've built for? That? Claire wiped her eyes, her voice breaking as she answered. I don't have a good answer. I was lonely and Jake was there. He made me feel seen. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth. Seen? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. I've been here the whole time, Claire. You just didn't bother looking. That night after the session, we rode home in silence. The house was dark when we got back, the kids already asleep. Claire lingered by the door, her shoulders slumped. Andrew, she said softly, her voice breaking. Do you think there's any hope for us? I stared at her, my heart a tangle of emotions. Anger, sadness, exhaustion. But somewhere beneath it all was a faint glimmer of something else. Oh, maybe. I don't know, I admitted. But I think I owe it to the kids, and to myself, to find out. She nodded, her tears falling silently. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. We took things one step at a time, one conversation at a time. Therapy helped, but it didn't erase the pain or the anger. It wasn't until I saw Claire laughing with the kids one evening, her guard down for the first time in weeks, that I realized something. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, not completely. But maybe, just maybe, we could learn to live with the cracks.